Friends, humanists, colleagues, today I have the supreme pleasure of introducing to you a very good friend who will speak to us. The only greater pleasure would have been if she was here with us in person. I heard of Rabab 5 years ago by sheer chance. I was aimlessly listening to Egyptian radio stations on the internet, maybe hoping to catch a nugget of news not covered here, or maybe just to reconnect with the country of my birth that I had left 47 years before. Egypt and I could by then have been on different planets, though I had started to pay more attention with the onset of the then hopeful Arab Spring. In any case, on that day, and purely by accident, I heard an amazing documentary presented by this Rabab Kamal, of whom I had never heard before. The documentary was about the Egyptian thinker Nasr Hamid Abu Zaid, who had famously been divorced from his wife back in the 1990s by the Islamic religious authorities because they objected to his writings. They declare him to be an apostate, and then as an apostate, he couldn't remain married to a Muslim woman. Abu Zaid left Egypt with his wife to continue his academic career in Europe, but returned to Egypt years later. Sadly, he died in 2010. After hearing that show, I realized that I was listening to an exceptional personality. I thought that anyone who could address such subjects on Egyptian radio was very courageous indeed. I continued to listen to Radio Cairo and heard other documentaries she produced and aired about female genital mutilation, an interview with the famous feminist icon Nawal al-Saadawi, and then on her regular shows promoting Enlightenment values, humanism, and above all, women's emancipation, in particular, their social and psychological emancipation. The slogan of her Saturday show, The Book Club, is critical reading and critical thinking. I got to know Rabab better, first on Facebook and then upon meeting her the next year in Cairo. But describing Rabab as a broadcaster or media personality only scratches the surface. She is a dedicated activist for the causes she believes in. She is a talented researcher, opinion writer, and journalist. She has published 4 books in Arabic with titles such as Secular Inspiration, The History and Challenges of Secularism in Islamic States, State of the Imam, Religion and Politics in Egypt, Women in the Realm of Islamic Fundamentalism, and the mindset of the Salafi and jihadist thought and its impact on societal culture. Rabab has spoken at numerous conferences and seminars in the Middle East, in Europe, and in North America on women's rights, coexistence, and combating terrorism, fundamentalism, hate speech, and fake news. It may be odd to describe someone one has met in person only twice as a close friend, but in the case of Rabab, it fits. But enough with this introduction. It's time for you, Rabab.
Thank you, George, for this introduction, and thank you for having me with you today. Bulgarian, I would like to call you name by name. Thank you very much for being here. Can you hear me fine?
Yeah, but there was a bit of a break for a second.
Okay. Break. Okay, everything's fine. Now, before we go on with our talk, I mean, I would prefer to call it a talk, brainstorming. I would also like to give you an insight from a different point of view from inside the Middle East. And when I talk about a different insight, I'm not talking about an insight from a cultural point of view only, but also people who are working in the grassroots of society, also people who are working in the grassroots of society. Should I continue? I think I think there is a voice that is unmuted.
I think she's muted now.
It was, but they're muted now.
Okay. This is the idea that this is the idea of our talk for today. Now, let me start with why I called it the silent revolution and why it is no longer silent. Back in 2011, I was not one of the people who took place or part in the Egyptian revolution. I did not take part of the Egyptian revolution in 2011. That would be very much surprising for a lot of people. How can you be a rebellion against all of the ideas, the patriarchal ideas of your society, and not take part of the revolution. I was one of the people that was, let's say, an observer of history at the time, but also at the time I was very much cautious of change. Change is very important. Change will come. Change is not just a change of authority, but it's the change of culture, the change of the mindset. It is the change where we would have a constitution and we would have people that believe in the equal rights, not just between men and women, but people of different sexuality, religion, beliefs, and so forth. And because I was very close to the grassroots of society at the time, and because I have a little farm and I go there and I see people in the rural areas, I was very much not agreeing with all the intellects that were coming on TV and saying, we will overthrow the regime and then we will have the ballot box and we will have democracy. For me, I was saying the ballot box will bring the Islamists and we will start striving for the very minor rights that we have been fighting for many years. So the revolution is something even bigger than the idea of overthrowing regimes and authorities. It has core, it has more depth than that. And why am I beginning this way? Because the real test of any revolution or the real test of any authority, both the revolution and authority that claim that they support the rights of women, the equal rights of women, is tested when it comes to the actual equal rights. What I mean is we have two kinds of rhetorics in the Middle East. I'm going to be talking about Egypt as an example. There are similarities between Egypt and other countries indeed, but also there are differences. But let me talk about Egypt as an example and also as a country in the Middle East, a country that is not secular. At the same time, it is more of a country that actually has its legislation comply with Sharia law. And when it comes to the rights of women, we have this problematic issue of the rights of women are there. We believe in the rights of women as long as it does not contradict Sharia law. And this is probably one of the biggest challenges that we have. In my third book, Women in the Realm of Fundamentalism, I started with a comparative study between the Islamic factions, how they perceive women, the authority, how it perceives women, society, how it perceives women, and how religious leaders who call themselves moderate perceive women. And despite the fact that all of the above mentioned have a different, they have different views politically, or they have different views when it comes to the interpretation of Islam in the penal code or in any kind of legislation, because according to our constitution, all legislation has to be adequate or comply with Sharia law. Despite the fact they have their differences, but when it comes to women, they have a rhetoric that is very much similar, and that is they use the word take care of women, and take care of women is based on a hadith in Arabic, رفقاً بالقوارير, and this is a hadith dates back 1400 years ago. The idea of the hadith is that the Prophet was telling his followers to take care of the women on the camels and treat them as if they were glass jars. So a lot of people would like this hadith and they say, this is absolutely wonderful, this is beautiful, this is how we should be treated. No, this is not how you should be treated. It's probably a nice hadith to be said in the sense of taking care of women, but you're not supposed to be someone who is under the wings of anybody. You should be a woman who has full citizenship. So this is the rhetoric that I'm talking about, and I have articles and research, and I also have a research coming out very soon in Leipzig University in Germany. It's about the patriarchal society, how it opposes women's rights, and then it also condones women's rights. It opposes women's rights in the name of patriarchy and in the name of rights that do not comply with Sharia law, and at the same time they support women's rights in the name of Sharia law. So a woman's rights in the Middle East is only what you get if it's with Sharia law, and this is the main problematic issue that we have. Let me tell you about the many subjects and topics that we are working on the ground. But mainly one of the biggest things that we're working on is the personal status law. The personal status law is one of the biggest challenges, and it's the real challenge of equal rights in the penal code, in the personal status law. We always talk about the empowerment of women. You would find it in the Arab world that we talk about how many judges do we have, how many ministers do we have, how many members of parliament do we have, which is absolutely something significant. The empowering of women is very important, but it's also an authoritarian empowerment of women. The Muslim Brotherhood used to empower women during the time that they were in control of the country. Iran is empowering women in a sense as long as the laws do not contradict Sharia law. But when we really want to do something and create some kind of equal opportunities, the biggest challenge that we have is the personal status law. So here are some of the things that we are working on today, and these things we were not able to talk about probably 50 years ago. Some issues we were not able to talk about only 10 years ago, and that's why the revolution of 2011, despite the fact I was very afraid of it because it will actually give us more challenges, but the beauty of it made people talk, and it made people break their silence and also break their fear. Specifically when it comes to the freedom of religion, freedom of belief, freedom of thought. I'm going to, put that aside today because that would actually need 2-3 meetings. I write about these topics as well, and I advocate them. But I really want to stress on women today. And by the way, the women's rights has to do with freedom of belief as well. Why? Because sometimes when we advocate a certain right for women, any kind of woman could face the accusation of contempt of religion or blasphemy. You see, blasphemy is not just people who are who have freedom of thought, who have freedom of belief, who are actually, they believe in something that the society, against the societal and the religious norms. But sometimes when you have a different interpretation of Islam itself, or you have a different interpretation of human rights itself, this could be regarded as, something that is blasphemous. So this is why I called it the silent revolution. It is not silent no more because of the revolution, because of the revolution of ideas, not just the revolution of 2011. When I refer to the revolution of 2011, I'm not talking about the toppling of the regimes. I'm talking about the revolution in society itself, and also the cyber community helped in that extensively. I have a radio show, but I am known more of my writings in advocacy, and this is welcome to new media. So despite the fact I'm working in traditional media, I know what new media really does mean. Let us just give you an example of some of the topics that we are advocating today, and we were not able to talk about that many years ago. I put this in a chapter called "The Islamization of Women's Rights in Government Law." The Islamization of women's rights means that whenever we talk about women's rights, instead of talking about equal opportunities, we give it a sense of Islamization. Women's rights have to be Islamized in order to be acknowledged by the law. So this is chapter 5, and it's part of the of the so-called silent revolution that is no longer the silent revolution. One of the things that we are talking about right now and advocating is that we need a clear law regarding domestic violence. We do not have a law for domestic violence in Egypt. That's my cat, I'm sorry. Down. So we do not have a law for domestic violence, a clear law that is not ambiguous for domestic violence in Egypt. We have a problem there, which is Article 60 of the Penal Code, which says that the Penal Code applies to everything except for anything that contradicts Sharia law. This is an article in the Egyptian Penal Code, and because of that, we have a problem with issuing domestic violence, a law against domestic violence. We also have another problem regarding the religious institution, the governmental religious institution, Al-Azhar, which of course, again, is the highest Sunni institution for Sunni Muslims in the world. And despite the fact that in the very recent years, because of the pressure that we have been mounting upon Al-Azhar, it never came out in the past couple of years and said men should beat their wives in compliance with verse number 34 of Surah Nisa, or women's chapter. But they're saying that you should treat your wife good and nicely, but at the same time, they're not advocating domestic violence law. You see, so this is the rhetoric. We're against women being beaten by their husbands, but we cannot draft a law that would actually criminalize that. So we're pushing for domestic violence, a law for domestic violence. We were not able to talk about that many years ago. We are also talking about a law that would criminalize marital rape. Marital rape, this is something that we were not able to talk about many years ago. Maybe this would have more challenges than domestic violence law, but I think it's coming in hand. The domestic violence law, we're working on it with a number of legislators, and there are a lot of drafts. And it seems to be that we could push it forward, probably not in the near future, but it's coming anyway. I mean, it was 5 years ago, 6 years ago, we did not have a sexual harassment law. Now we have a sexual harassment law because of the work of the individuals, the initiatives, and the NGOs who have been pushing the government to do so in the past few years. We have a problem with reporting the cases, so that is something else, and we are working now on having police stations specifically for reporting sexual crimes or sexual harassment crimes. And the reason for that is that if you go to a police station and they're in an area where there's a lot of robberies, there's a lot of criminal cases, they would think that a woman coming to report sexual harassment is something absolutely trivial. So we're working on another law that would help us have specific centers for sexual harassment reporting, and it would be supervised also by the Ministry of Interior. This is our plea. This is what we are trying to work on, but it's still going to take time. We also are talking about the equal right of divorce in Islam, and we do not have equal rights for divorce. We have laws that were passed in the year 2000 where women could get a divorce through a judge, but a man could divorce his wife just on his way to a cafe shop. He would just go to the public officer that is responsible for divorce papers, and he would just divorce her on his way to a cafe or on his way to work or something like that. We are also, one of the things that I am advocating, and when I say I, it's not I, it's us, people that are working in this domain, individuals, NGOs. We're also trying to advocate the abolishing of the obedient homes. Now, what is an obedient home? An obedient home is a law that gives the husband, according to Sharia law, the right to summon his wife to his house, and he would actually file a lawsuit in front of the judge and say that she was not obedient as a wife. She did not give him his marital rights. She did not have sex with him when he asked to, and the judge would have to ask her, were you obedient or not? In the year 2013, and I am getting governmental numbers, in the year 2013, we had 67,000 cases filed before the Egyptian courts, and 19,000 were ruled disobedient. And if a woman is ruled disobedient, she loses absolutely her rights, or her little rights, so to speak. We were also, but this is not, the upcoming topic is not something that we're really advocating, because we were able to win this case back in the year 2000. Back in the year 2000, women were not able to fly abroad or travel abroad unless they had the written consent of their husbands, according to Sharia law. In Arabic, it's called احتباس الزوجة في الشريعة الإسلامية, or the holding of women in their houses according to Sharia law. Now, this is a very interesting story. During the time of Nasser, the second president of Egypt, Gamal Abdel Nasser, 1956, he gave women the right to vote and run for elections. And in 1956, we had women in parliament. So you would say that is absolutely wonderful. This is empowerment of women. Yes, it is. It is something that the monarchy that he overthrew was totally against. Yes, that's true. But what he did in 1959, 3 years after he says he granted women that right, he did not grant women that right. We had a movement that was pushing for it since 1923, not 1954, not 1950, since 1923. So he did not give that right to women, but the government in Egypt says it gave that right to women. Well, it did approve that right after many years of advocating for it. But the interesting thing is that in 1959, Nasser had a presidential decree saying that women could not travel abroad without the written consent of their husbands. So in 1956, they can vote and they could go into parliament, but in 1959, they can't travel abroad without the consent of their husbands. In the year 2000, and my late mother was one of the people who was actually advocating this. She was totally against the idea of the man holding his wife in the country just because he doesn't want her to travel. And in the year 2000, the Constitutional Court gave women that right. It gave them that right that they could travel without the consent of their husbands. And what happened is that women would go to the airport and the husband would have her on a list, and then they would actually tell her, you cannot travel, you have to go back home, and that was the story. So does that mean that men cannot stop their wives from flying abroad or traveling abroad? Actually, they still do have that right, but they have to file for a lawsuit, and a lawsuit could take many, many months. But before, all they had to do was just file a report in the Ministry of Interior. So this is one fight that has been going on since 1959. It is a fight that I regard we have won, but we're still working on the idea that a husband cannot stop his wife from traveling abroad without his consent, even if it's through court. One of the things that we have been advocating also is laws regarding paternity tests. Why is paternity tests very important? We have 17,000 paternity tests in court where fathers are not acknowledging their sons and daughters. There are many reasons for this. Sometimes it's some elderly people that marry young girls, minor girls, they leave them pregnant, and it's what we call orphan marriage or a secret marriage, which is not officiated. By the way, secret marriages are not against the law. They're called unofficiated traditional marriages. But what happens is a woman loses all of her rights if she is married in an unofficiated marriage. And also girls and boys who are born out of wedlock. So why do we have 17,000 cases pending? Because according to the legislation, the civil legislation, which is based on Sharia law, that the DNA test will not apply or will not be credible until the judge is able to prove that the man and the woman were married at the time of the time of the conception of their child, even if it is a false marriage. But if it's born out of wedlock, then the DNA does not apply. So we are talking about the rights of children. We had a law in 2008 that gave the rights to children to get the names of their mothers and grandfathers. But at the same time, this is not solving anything. We're kind of going around in circles, maneuvering. But these are some of the things that we are advocating now, and it was impossible. We would get stoned if we would talk about this like 15 or 20 years ago. And we here means, you know, the movement, the initiative itself. We also have a law in the penal code, and it's absolutely drastic, that if a man catches his wife betraying him with another man, he can kill her and he would be set free. And on the other hand, a woman, and I have this in my book, all the number of the articles in the penal code, and a woman, on the other hand, if she catches her husband cheating on her, she does any kind of bodily harm, it would be homicide. Now, we wanted to abolish that law completely, and any kind of infidelity would be part of, you know, family law, not the penal code. Have a prenuptial or something, you know, do what everybody is doing in the world. But you know, have a clause for it. It's something, get a divorce, but don't put an article in the penal code that says that you could kill another party. And in 2016, when some activists, and this is really funny, but you know, this is our life, when some female activists brought up this topic, they wanted equality. They wanted women to have the right to kill their husbands, and this is not the law. This is not the idea. The idea is to abolish the law completely. You see, equality is not giving a woman a gun in order to kill her husband if he's caught in the act. The equality means abolish these laws. These laws belong to many centuries ago, and they have no place nowadays. The personal status law in Egypt and also in other Arab countries is the biggest challenge of all. I'm all for the empowerment of women. I work with NGOs where we advocate, and we really do work on stuff like empowering women economically, financially. We work with the idea of women who have to be empowered in certain positions in the state or in the private sector. This is very important. I'm not downplaying it. But the idea of women who are empowered in specific places, or they are empowered in certain positions, but they have a personal status law that is not serving them all that good, is absolutely something that we need to look into. There are still many topics. I can't talk about them all, but Probably George was there in Chicago when we were giving a lecture about young girls who were advocating against FGM, 13, 14-year-old girls, and they were going around in their villages saying, no, don't maim us anymore. It's also part of the initiatives, young girls that as young as 13 and 14 years old who are advocating the causes that hurt them, because we have a 91% rate of FGM in Egypt, female genital mutilation. The numbers have gone down after there was a legislation against it in 2008. Until this very day, we still have religious leaders who say, no, it should not be criminalized. But again, we do have a law that is being implemented. But what is really more important than the law is the kind of activism and the kind of young girls and young boys who are advocating against it. I have another research about women and inheritance law in Sharia law, which is very, very controversial. And this is, the kind of things that could, easily get you caught in a blasphemy case or anything. But I wrote about it. It's still to be published in Tunisia. It is co-authored with an academic from there. There are many, many topics that now we are talking about very openly, despite anything. And this is why the silent revolution is no longer silent. And I think that women's rights is the real test for any kind of revolution that will call itself a democracy. It is the real test for any kind of regime that would call itself supporting women's rights. There are other topics. The last thing I need to say is that we have another kind of feminism that is calling for, we don't want rights. There is what we call the Islamic feminism. And back in the year 2003, I was polarized into one of the Islamic groups or factions. So I was part of their doctrine for only 1 year. And the Islamic feminism says that we will vote against any rights given to women against that does not comply with Sharia law. And this is another problematic issue, but you could just simply say, if you want to waiver your rights, okay, that's your life, but do not implement it on other women. You see, democracy and the ballot box is not about having a referendum on basic human rights. If you want to waiver your rights that is given to you by a society that believes in citizenship, that would probably be your right. I mean, we have some women who are against females becoming judges. So we would simply say, okay, that's great. Don't become a judge then. Don't study law school, but do not try to have a referendum against women who are working as judges. So it's really very complicated. The situation in Egypt is just an example. There are a lot of similarities with other Arab countries. They probably have the same laws, but different naming of the law. But it's the main idea. So this is just an overview of what I wanted to say today. I hope I just put in some of the points. I mean, it's really something that needs more extensive talk. Absolutely.
I think, thank you, Rabab. It was great to hear from you again. I know that personally I heard a lot of it from you before, but I hope that my colleagues here enjoyed this brief introduction to the subject. I think as far as questions, I would encourage everybody who has any question to put questions in the chat and address it preferably directly to Rabab, or if not to everyone. And Rabab will pick them up. After we go through the written questions on the chat, we might entertain some questions by people putting their fingers or hands up. Okay? Yes? Question? Okay.
I put a question in the chat, George.
Yes, I saw that now.
Okay.
Can I see the question?
Yes, you can go in the chat.
I can go into the chat. Oh, yes.
That was just to you, George. It wasn't to everyone.
Oh, I see. Okay.
I thought that you were going to be moderating that.
Can you send it to her directly?
Sure.
Okay.
Rabab, if you get questions that get sent to you directly, maybe you can read the question before answering it so that we know what you're answering.
Okay, the first question I got, it's from Richard. Let me open it one more time. I don't know. Oh, yes, here it is. I have from Carol to everyone and from Richard to me. So should I start with the everyone, then the private one?
Your choice.
Okay. From Carol, hi, thank you for speaking with us today. You mentioned a movement that you are a part of. Does the movement have a name? Oh, I'm talking about the movement itself, the many initiatives that are going on. I volunteer in an NGO called Tadween, and this is a movement of young women who are trying to advocate initiatives regarding women. I'm also working with other initiatives that are not NGOs. So it's not just one movement. When I was using the word movement, it was not like an organized movement. And this is probably the most important thing that we wanted to address, is that sometimes we think that an organized movement would actually have more depth to it. Yes, indeed. But the wonderful thing about the movement, the initiatives, the whole situation that is going on is that you are having people who are not polarized into certain movements, but who are advocating their rights without any kind of a specific organization. So it's when we talk about sexual harassment, all women in Egypt have a problem with sexual harassment. So it's not just one movement that is advocating it. Sometimes people are advocating it through very individual initiatives. So by the word movement, I'm talking about the cultural mindset itself. But of course, there are NGOs that we work with and we volunteer with. But again, the thing that I want to say that after 2011, there has been a lot of human rights advocacy that is being initiated not by certain movements, but that there is a sense of the cultural mindset is changing bit by bit. So this is what I meant by movement. From Richard, travel restricted for unmarried women in Egypt? No, in Egypt it was not restricted for unmarried women. In other parts of the Arab world, like Saudi Arabia, it was. Of course, there's a lot of things changing in Saudi Arabia right now. And despite the fact unmarried women were not restricted from traveling in Egypt before the year 2000, but sometimes when women are traveling to certain countries like Jordan, Lebanon, or other countries to work, they would have to get some kind of paper from the Ministry of Interior so that they could travel. But this is for men and women the same, not just for women. Egypt is urbanizing, with urban population expected to exceed rural ones by 2040. How will this trend help or hurt the women's movement? In my point of view, it will actually help the women's movement in general. You see, but in Egypt, it's not just about urban population. I think it has much more depth into that. I have a research coming very soon about the urban population and the rural population, and what women and how women could actually actually find their freedom. And when I talk about freedom, I'm talking about the economic freedom, because this is one of the things that I'm really working on. Empowering women means empowering them financially. It's not just a bunch of slogans. So this question, this would have, I will send you my research when it's done, because there's a lot of data regarding this one. And because in Egypt, it has nothing to do with urban and rural. Sometimes women in rural areas would have more freedom than in specific urban places. So this needs an extensive answer. From Jerry, it sounds like you might be putting yourself in danger. Is this true? How do you protect yourself so that you can pursue these important changes? You answered that one, George. Okay, so definitely, I know that when you're talking against the cultural and religion, you are putting yourself in relative danger. What I try to do personally on a personal level is that I try to provoke people into thinking, not provoke them by humiliating them. I mean, the idea is not humiliating somebody's culture. They were brought up to believe that anything else is part of a conspiracy against their religion and culture and so forth. So my idea is to be part of the community, not to give a sermon to the community. So the first thing is you really try to be part of the grassroots, because we are part of the grassroots. Do I get threat messages sometimes? Yeah, sure, it happens. I don't take it. Well, there are some things that I take seriously, and there are some things that I know is just hate speech. And what you do is that you insist on not being dragged into a hate speech, because this is one of the biggest problems that we have. We have feminists and we have humanists that have been dragged into a hate speech. You are going up against the hate speech. You cannot be dragged into one. Of course, there are other dangers if somebody decided to file a blasphemy law. But then again, what I try to do is that I try to advocate the causes without causing injury. But of course, the danger is there; it's imminent. But if like Franklin Roosevelt said, the biggest fear is fear itself. So we just can't stay there and say, okay, it's dangerous. Taking a flight from one place to the other, it's dangerous, in a sense. But well, most flights land safely. So let's hope this is the way it ends or begins. Who knows? Carol, thank you. I'm glad to hear you. Your hard work and sacrifice are paying off and progress is being made. Thank you, Carol. It's a group of wonderful women, and I'm very optimistic about the young generation. I'm 41 years old, and I started my advocacy probably 7-8 years ago, but there are young girls that are young as 18 and 19, and I look and I see the power and the determination, and I believe something is going to happen. And they are not public figures. They are not people who have a lot of followers. They're not people who have radio and TV programs. They are just young girls who are advocating a specific cause in their area, like the FGM girls who are advocating against the FGM, or minor marriages. We have a problem of minor marriages in Egypt. I did not talk about that in our meeting today, but I wrote about it extensively. And we have young girls and young boys and people who are saying minor marriages is wrong, and this is something that is happening because of poverty and also because of some religious ideas. We have. So, and I'm not sacrificing. Nobody's sacrificing anything. This is part of, well, what we're doing. We're all part of it. Kelly, hi Kelly. To what degree does your typical Egyptian male support women's rights, for rights, not those tied to Sharia? Well, this is actually part of the revolution. And I'm talking here about the cultural revolution, the revolution in the mindset. We have some figures, male figures, young boys who are not even figures, that are supportive of women's rights, fully equal rights, and they do not think about, does it comply with Sharia law or not. We do have that. We do have liberal male voices, and they are in their 20s, they are in their 30s. But the majority of men, because it's a male chauvinist patriarchal society, are definitely not with rights of women. Some men are not even religious enough, but they're against the rights of women. And let me say that I want to say something about the question. It is not about men versus women. It's about culture versus women. Because you would find a woman who is against the rights of women because she was raised in a male chauvinist patriarchal society. And you would find men who are supporting women. And this is also part of the introduction of my book, is that it is not a fight between men and women. It is the culture. You would find women who are against women's rights, and you would find men who are with women's rights. So what we're going up against is culture of discrimination. And this culture of discrimination is building the mindset of women and men alike. So let's target the culture itself. And when I say target the culture, I mean, everybody has their own cultural heritage. But when we talk about cultural heritage, it does not mean any kind of discrimination. You could have cultural heritage in your cuisine, you know, your famous delicacy, but it has nothing to do with the basic human rights between men, women, and, you know, not just men and women. It's equal rights among everybody, different sexualities, people from different religions, creeds, ideology, and so forth. Is there any other questions?
If there are no written questions, I wonder if people who want to express something verbally can raise their hands now. Anybody has any questions? Yes, Priyank.
Hi. Hi. Thank you, George. Thanks for hosting this. And thank you, Rabab, for speaking with us. And it's really cool it's always great to hear stories of folks who are doing all this great stuff in the Middle East. And I'm originally from the region. And I mean, I remember at the point when the Arab Spring was happening, I was in Canada, moved to Canada. And I still remember, a lot of my peers, and as well as students I've met since then who were involved in these things. And I think especially for a lot of people in Canada who've not experienced it, it really, puts our lives in perspective of the degree of issues they're facing. So thank you a lot for your work. And I just have a question about, I know, you're doing great work towards changing the law in Egypt about, women's rights and such. And quite recently, a lot of the similar stuff actually had happened in Sudan, just south of Egypt, where they have it's not the elected government yet. It's just the in-between government. But they got rid of an Islamist. But they put laws banning female genital mutilation. Finally, women can now travel a lot more freely. If you're non-Muslim, you can drink. Hopefully soon everyone can drink over there. That always helps every society, I think. And a lot of other reforms. And I was wondering, in Egypt, they did do things about FGM back in 2008, as you said. And there are a lot of countries where, if I look at, for example, India, right, where they got rid of slavery, in the 1800s, when they were a British colony. They also banned the caste system on independence, but which is the societal problems they have over there. But these things, where's slavery the most in the world is in India. Caste system totally still exists. So I was just wondering, maybe you have a better idea of how the FGM law has played out in Egypt since 2008.
Okay.
Do you think enacting these laws to create change within society, will the rule of law be able to make sure these things happen? It's one of your comments. Thanks.
Thank you so much for your question. There are a lot of things we can say about FGM. Let me give you some history about FGM in Egypt. Of course, I'm following up on India, Japan. We always talk about Western women and and the history of feminism in the West, but nobody really talks about what's going in the East, you know, the Far East. And that's why we write about that a lot. And you see, because it's also a conservative society and there are a lot of similarities. And by the way, also the rights of women in Western society, it was, you know, conservative for extensive period of time before. FGM, okay, let me give you the history. Female genital mutilation, there are two types of female genital mutilation. There is the partial FGM and there is the whole FGM. The partial FGM is where you cut a part of a woman's genital, a little girl's genital organ. And the full FGM is where actually there is more of a mutation. So when I was with the Muslim women, the Muslim sisterhood back in 2003, I did not luckily go through FGM because my mother and father opposed it. So I was one of the lucky people. But when I was with these sisters back in 2003, I was polarized for only a year with some sisters from the Muslim Brotherhood. And they were talking about FGM. They were talking about the partial FGM, where you take a part of the clit that is absolutely fine, and this would actually preserve the chastity of women. You would find people here in Egypt, and they're very sophisticated and educated, and they would say, no, it is not part of Sharia law. Is it part of Sharia law or is it not part of Sharia law? Actually, back in 1951, Al-Azhar institution, which is the Sunni moderate institution of the Islamic world, said that doctors should stop opposing FGM and they should not talk about religion because there is a hadith about FGM and we're not going to change it. It's there. How can you change a hadith? In 1994, Egypt wanted to change the law and criminalize FGM. Al-Azhar at the time, and that was back in 1994. That's like, what, 30 years, less than 30 years ago. That was like 26 years ago? Okay, yeah, that was like 26 years ago. And Al-Azhar said, FGM is part of Sharia law and it will not be criminalized. We will not criminalize it. But because of the public pressure of the feminist movement and the human rights movement for so many years, the government, and also pressure from some international organizations, the government of Egypt in the year 2007 was adamant to change the law. So you have pressure coming in from women, and you have pressure coming in from some feminist movements, you have pressure coming in from international organizations. So the government decided it wants to change the law. It could not change the law without getting a fatwa, which is a religious ruling from the governmental institution of Egypt, which is Al-Azhar. And at the time they said it is against Sharia law. Until this day and age, I have a problem, we have a problem when some people, some religious leaders from inside of Al-Azhar would say, no, the legislation was wrong, the hadith is right. I don't get into that because now I have the law, so I'm not going into that talk anymore. I have the law. But some of the fanatics, some of the people who are against the criminalization of FGM would be working against the law in the rural areas. They will be working against the law, and yes, girls until this day and age are subjected to FGM. I had a program, a documentary about FGM. It aired on Radio Cairo a few years ago, and I remember that you know, some people did object to it because we were talking about FGM, despite the fact that FGM is criminalized. So does it change? It will not eradicate FGM completely. We had a law in the year 2008. We had another article in the year 2016 But will things change right away? No, things will not change. The numbers have come down from 96% to 91%. This is not the way we actually measure it, because we have age groups like from age 11 to age 12, it has gone down by 1 to 2%. From age 13 to 15 years old, it has gone down by 3%. You see, we just don't say it was 96% and it's now 91%. We have different age groups, and also it differs from one part or one place or one geography to the other. So probably it would be less in some urban areas, but it would be more in rural areas. It would be more in some shanty towns inside the city. But what is the good side of the law? That now we can advocate. There was a time when if somebody advocated against FGM, they could actually find themselves opposing the law. So now we have a law that criminalizes FGM. We can start working in reality on the ground. So this was one of the biggest challenges that we had, and this is one of the biggest benefits of the law. A law does not change the mindset, but it also helps you start working on the ground. I mean, in the year 1877, Egypt abolished concubines, slavery of women. Today, after 130 or 145 years or something like that, I would be talking to a friend, a colleague in radio, and she would say, there were no concubines in the history of Islam. And it's like, because the law changed, she believes that it was never there. It was there and then it was abolished. So the same thing applies to FGM. The law is helping us doing our initiatives, working in remote areas. We have another problem with FGM is that when we started campaigning against FGM, we were campaigning saying, you know what, your child could die, your daughter could die. So you know what happened? The people took their girls and they let the doctors conduct the FGM. It used to be conducted by a nurse or by somebody who's from the town or from the village, someone who does not know anything about hygiene or sanitation. But now they're taking it to the doctors. 75% of the cases of FGM are operated by doctors. So we have what we term in Egypt the medicalization of FGM. So it's like we got it wrong. We kept on advocating that this is something that could kill your daughter. We have to talk about other things. So now we're talking about the sexual life of your daughter when she grows up and gets married. She has the right. We actually had this in a commercial on state TV, you know, like women have the right to enjoy their marital sexual life. So you can't just take this part of her. So it's not just because she's dying. She needs to have a normal sexual life. Now we're talking about the psychological impact. So things are changing, but the momentum is very slow. But if you look at the course of history, how things are changing, well, the momentum is very good. No, the law is not going to change it. Not just the law, but it helps us advocate and work on the subject. For many years, we were not able to work on the subject. When I was interviewing Nawal Saadawi, the Egyptian feminist, for the radio, and by the idea of airing on the Egyptian radio, Nawal Saadawi was a big thing. I mean, this is not something that I was able to do 10 years ago, but it happened 3 or 4 years ago. She was one of the people who spoke against FGM back in the 60s. And feminists at the time would go like, oh my God, Nawal, you said the F word, which absolutely, horrific. So again, the silent revolution is not very silent.
Heba or Linda has a question.
Hello? Hi.
Hello.
Okay.
Linda.
Oh, sorry. Oh, which Linda? Is there more than one on here?
No, you are the Linda.
Oh, well, I've been learning a lot. I'm sorry, I didn't catch Rahab. Are you Rabab? Sorry. Are you yourself a Muslim, or are you ex-Muslim?
I don't get into Muslim, ex-Muslim. I get into the idea that I am a woman calling for human rights, basic rights, whether Muslim, Christian. I always refer to myself as someone who is advocating citizenship and secularism. But the idea is even deeper than the idea of Muslim, ex-Muslim, Christian, ex-Christian. The idea is rights for all, whatever the religion is. Oh, and by the way, I was talking here about feminism and Islam. We also, part of the advocation of personal status law is that we are trying to advocate for a civil marriage and divorce document for both Muslims and Christians, because Christians here in Egypt are not able to get a divorce because God does not sanction divorce. So we have many issues. It's not just about Muslim women. So when I talk about the rights of women, when I talk about women, I advocate the rights of the Baha'is, and I'm not a Baha'i. So I think it's much more deeper than just labeling yourself and confining yourself to your own religion. Your religion, your thoughts, it has something between you and God. Or if you're not religious, it's between you and nature. I don't know, but we're talking about equal rights and equal citizenship, no matter what the religion is. This is what's really important.
Heba? Can you unmute Heba? Yeah, I can. Heba, your question.
Hi, Rabab. Thanks for coming, and thanks for having us with you. My question is, when I go through the media, I have been seeing lots of women just still thinking like they're not positive, like the only person against the woman in Egypt is the woman herself. So lots of men, they sometimes supporting women, standing for her right, while the woman, she never did that. The GFM is the most horrible thing happened to the woman in Egypt. I have been going through that, and it was really like a shock. I really cannot enjoy my marriage. And you can't tell the woman that the girl, she's not gonna enjoy her marriage because she doesn't care. She considered the woman as a slave. So you're here to slave your husband. You're here to do whatever he wants, even if you don't like him, even if you're not enjoying it. You're just a slave. So my question is, I think that you're fighting with the wind if you're not gonna start with the woman. If you're not gonna start with the woman, go door by door, woman by, it's gonna be hard. You need a lots of support.
Yes, indeed. Okay, absolutely. I totally agree with you, but I have to comment on women, the biggest enemy of women. Let us tell our gang over here from where this came from. This was actually a very famous quote by an Arab poet, Nazar Qabbani. He said, "A woman is the biggest enemy of a woman." But when you come to think of it, and that was something that was like in the 1930s or 40s, but when you come to think of it, women who are against the rights of other women are part of the patriarchal doctrine. So what we need to do, and this is where I agree with you, is start with women, because if you have women revolting against the patriarchal doctrine itself, then you are gaining momentum. Then you're not fighting the winds, actually you're maneuvering. And this is part of it, Hiba, this is what is happening. I know sometimes when you're on social media, you see a lot of comments by girls and it's very devastating. And how can you be against your rights? And be yourself? But to her, she is supporting God. She is defending God. God created her that way, and she will be obedient. Mind you, they use words like submissive. You know, they
I'm sorry
talk
to
about
interrupt
submission.
you, but it's not God as much as the society too. The society is taking her down.
Yes, the society is taking her down, but why? Well, we have to think about the sociological.
Because the society is for a man only. It's not for a woman.
Exactly. It's her point of view about God, and this is the idea that is enforced on women by society. So how did they get, I mean, we can talk about Islamism, we can talk about the rise of fanaticism, not just about Islamism. Fanaticism could, could be attributed to other religions, but of course the biggest challenge that we have is fanatical ideas from Islamists in general in this part of the world. We can talk about that, but we also need to talk more. I mean, we just can't stick only to the verses and from where they got these ideas and the interpretation. It has to be done through sociological research, psychological research.
It's true.
This is very, very important because it could give you a sense of what could be done. So instead of just, everything's bad and women are against their rights, we would start thinking, okay, what is the reason? How can we help this? How can we have a model of change in just one village? So I am totally with you, and that is that if you are able to work with young girls who would be against the patriarchal society that they grew up in, then you are going somewhere. And despite the fact it looks gloomy on social media, but because we work in the grassroots of society, and because I've met young girls, I have, I talked about the death threats or the threats that I get on social media, but I did not talk about the zillion of messages that I get from young girls who are living in very dire circumstances and situation, and they say, I want to break free, but I can't talk, I can't speak. And how we help girls like that is that we try to, we help them not by telling them, go in public and claim your claim your freedom. She could get killed for that. Specifically, if she lives in an area where patriarchal norms are on the rise, specifically in southern Egypt. But what we try to do is that we try to help them in scholarships. We try to get them incorporated in some kind of NGO as a volunteer. And I always tell girls, never jeopardize yourself. But I'm happy that I'm listening to those ideas from young girls that you'd actually pass them in the street and you would never take notice of them. Change happens bit by bit, and it happens in circles. And also part of it is economy. We cannot discuss anything without economy. When we had a research about, and actually it's in this book, research about minor marriages. The main reason for minor marriages is poverty. The main reason, 90% of the cases, yes, there were minor marriages from families that are well off, but 90% of the marriages, the minor marriages, were because of poverty. But what does a father do and a mother do? They start resorting to a religious leader. Tell us what we're doing is right. It is not against God. So the religious leader or the Imam would go up to verse number 4 of Surah Al-Talaq, or the divorce chapter, and we have some vocabulary where it could be interpreted this way or that way. Oh yes, you could, yes, she could get married at a young age, that's fine.
Oh my God.
So sometimes we're looking for religious justification, but the real thing, the real problem is poverty. So it's not just about fanaticism as if fanaticism just came out of the blue. Fanaticism has its cultural and heritage in our history. But how can you change the mindset? It's not by giving sermons. It's by more psychological research, sociological research, and economy. Whenever anybody says anything, economy has to be incorporated in this. We're talking. I remember that in the village where my father came from. But by the way, my grandfather was from Al-Azhar. My grandfather to my father was from Al-Azhar. And see, things are changing. I remember that one of the women who was performing FGM, she was against the campaigns of FGM eradication because she would say, but this is how I feed myself. So of course it is horrific, and of course we're not going to, people would say, do you feel sorry for her? She's cutting those girls in order to, yes, but maybe we need to have some kind of economic and projects, micro projects for women in this area, so they would find, they would not go up against any kind of campaigns. There are different topics and subjects. You will not change the mindset of people just by Facebook slogans. It happens. Facebook, Twitter, social media has had an impact. It did. I mean, again, I'm a radio anchor, and I became known because of my work in activism and my work in new media, not traditional media. So yes, it does help, but there's something under that social media that we're really very fascinated about, and it's happening in the real world.
It's true. Let me tell you, I was like wearing hijab. I was tough with myself more than them, but I have to go through psychologists to change. So change is gonna happen. It's gonna happen, but it need a lots of work and need a tons of people like you, Rabab.
And it's okay if we don't accomplish everything. And this is to all of our wonderful friends, and I'm your guest, but all of our wonderful friends that are with us today. Change happens, it takes time. So it's okay, and this is what I tell a lot of people who really feel down. It's never going to happen. Look at all of the challenges. We're getting threats. We could actually stand in front of a trial or in a court of law just because we're trying to go up against some norms. And I would say, enjoy your life, try to do your work, but things will not change overnight. And if you come to look at the history of feminism, not just in the Middle East, it really took time. Not just the history of feminism, the history of human rights in general. So we have to acknowledge that we will not be able to accomplish everything in our lifetime, and it's not just the work of one person or a group of people. We're just trying to make the wave, and then the next wave takes it to the other wave. Let me conclude this by what Margaret Thatcher said in 1973. They told her, when will the United Kingdom have its first female prime minister? You know what she said? She said, not in my lifetime. And it was in her lifetime. so it, it takes time. Things take time. So I know that.
You know what makes me feel like it's going to take long? Because after Wahhabi is coming into the society of Egypt, it's make it worse. You understand what I'm saying?
Okay, let us say what the Wahhabi is. I know that a lot of people know what the
Explain
Wahhabi
it to everybody, please.
In 1970, it was during the time when the oil business and the oil tycoons of Saudi Arabia and the Arab Gulf actually started to have an impact on other Arab countries such as Egypt, and this is what we call the Wahhabi wave. But by the way, this had something to do with the economy. They always had these ideas, but now they had billions and billions, so they could enforce their ideas. You see, so it comes down to economy. By the way, this is the topic of my fourth book, and in this book I am arguing that it was long before the Wahhabi. These ideas were long before the Wahhabis, and it was inside of our societies, even inside our civil societies, where women were wearing the spaghetti dresses and there was no hijab and stuff like that. It was inside of our society, but it was not apparent in the elite of the society. So the idea of the Wahhabis was there all along, and I have some kind of historical documentation to prove it. This is my fourth book. But what happened in the 1970s was the petrodollar. So again, it was the
Make it worse.
money. It was the money. The ideas was there. So again, when you talk about changing the mindset, you need to think economic-wise. That's it.
Rabab, go to the next few questions. Maybe you can answer them very fast.
Okay. Yeah, I have to because oh my God, my battery is low. So,
Okay,
I have to
just
ask
quickly,
them.
and we'll thank you very much after that.
Okay. Would you please read the questions because
Linda asks, are there microloan programs for women?
well, yes, there are in Egypt, and it's being it's being supervised by the government itself. وزارة التضامن الاجتماعي, solidarity, social solidarity ministry, yes. And also, how do you feel about the
abortion issue? I think we lost Rabab because of her battery problem. I think that I don't know if I can get her at all anymore, but I think that's over.
Rabab has left the building.
Rabab has left the building. And I hope it's just the battery, nothing else. Okay.
She did say the battery, so that's good.
Yeah.
That's good news. Okay.
So thank you all. I hope you all enjoyed it.
Really good, George.
Well, there will be others. And thanks everybody for coming. And I wish we could have given her some applause, but even if we give her applause, maybe what we can do is applause, and I will send her the recording.
Well, maybe, do you want to? Okay.
Oh, Richard, you should turn off the mutes. Everybody, turn off your mute before we do that.
Yeah. Do you want to give her a couple minutes, or?
Well, we can wait a bit. But anyway, turn on the sound.
All right.
Yes, she's back.
We going?
Hold on.
Hi guys. Rasha here. Nice to meet you all.
Well, hi, Rasha.
Hello. Welcome back, Rabab.
I share a lot with Rabab.
Rabab is back.
Oh,
Yeah,
she's back.
back. Okay. Hi Rabab.
She's back?
Yeah, she's back.
She's on and off.
That's good. Where's she?
Yeah, she's there. She's there.
Yeah,
Hi,
she's
Rabab, what
there.
happened? The battery's dead?
Connecting to audio.
Connecting to audio.
Oh.
Oh
I
my
can-
God.
Okay, please mute again, everybody.
Okay, mute everybody again.
I'm sorry, I had a malfunction over here.
Okay. Is
There was
that
one-
battery or the cat?
There was one last question about the abortion, so I had to log on again and come back to you because this is a very interesting and intriguing question. Can you hear me fine?
Yes, you can.
Abortion is a very touchy subject in Egypt and this part of the world. If you ask my very personal opinion, I actually I am with the right of women to have a choice in abortion. But the best we can do right now is that we are trying to, for the past few years, we have been advocating the right of women to have an abortion, but it's done, or the kind of legislation that is being proposed has to do with married women and women who could have some kind of danger on their lives because of the pregnancy. But we have been talking about the issue of abortion. We do have abortions in Egypt, but they are done illegally in clinics that are not well prepared, and that's why we have a lot of deaths that happen in private clinics. So we do have abortions, but they are illegal, and this is why the black market of abortion is really very high. The best that we can do right now is to have some kind of proposals about ending pregnancy in the case of a woman who has her life endangered because of the pregnancy. But if you're talking about my personal opinion, I'm totally with the idea of women choosing that, and especially that some of the cases that we have is where the father does not
does not acknowledge the child. And that's why in Women in the Realm of Fundamentalism, there is a chapter about the contradiction between the laws of abortion and the laws of paternity tests in Egypt and in the Arab world. It really needs still a lot of research.
I see that Cameron had a question, but he's gone. So maybe it's time to say thank you to Rabab and give her a big round of applause. But before we do that, we have to turn on, everybody has to turn off their mute and on their sound so that she can hear us.
Okay.
Yay, Rabab!
Thanks, Rabab. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Rabab.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah,
Thank
thank
you.
you, Rabab.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Linda.
Thank you
Okay.
so much.
I hope you
Everyone-
enjoyed it, Rabab, as much as we did.
I
Yeah.
did. Wonderful questions and wonderful company. Thank you so much.
Thank You're you.
Okay,
welcome.
thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Thanks. Take care.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Good night.
Okay. We're gone. Bye, Rabab.
Bye, everyone.
Yeah.
Bye, George.
Bye.
Bye.